The elevator didn't ding when the doors opened. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I stood there, staring into the 14th floor hallway of a building I'd never been in, holding a box of pastries I didn't even want to bring. I don't know why I noticed the silence, the missing ding, but I did. And it felt hollow, like I was already too late for something I couldn't name yet. The hallway was long, carpeted in gray. Quiet, except for muffled bass from whatever pop song was pulsing through the double doors at the end. The company logo glowed on the wall, some tech startup name that sounded like a vitamin brand. I walked slowly, pastries in hand, shoes too loud on the floor. This was supposed to be a surprise. Her phone had died, or that's what I told myself when she stopped answering. I was nearby anyway, picking up dry cleaning she forgot to grab for 2 weeks. So I thought, hey, drop by, say hi. Maybe she'll smile like she used to. Dumb thought, but it kept my hands busy. I pushed open the doors to the office. It hit me instantly, the artificial charm of corporate celebration. Balloons in the corners. An empty cake platter. People clumped together in half-sincere conversation. I scanned for her. She wasn't in the main space. That's when I saw the small crowd by the glass wall, near the balcony. They were watching something. Not laughing, but tight-mouthed smirking, the way people do when they witness something they probably shouldn't. I didn't hear her voice. I saw her first. Her hands were around his shoulders. His fingers were in her hair. Their foreheads touched. Eyes closed. That kind of closeness you don't stumble into. Then they kissed. Slow. Confident. Like it was earned. And the worst part? She smiled during it. Not after, during. Like this wasn't new. Like this was familiar. Safe. Routine. I didn't drop the pastries. I didn't shout. I just walked forward, through whispers, past faces that turned away when they saw me. She didn't notice until I was 3 steps away. Then, she did. She pulled back, startled. Her lips still wet. I said, "You just ended our marriage." Her eyes didn't well up. Her mouth didn't tremble. She tilted her head slightly, like I was the one out of place. And then she said, "You're wrong." No explanation. No apology. Just those 2 words, like a riddle tied to a time bomb. And for some godforsaken reason, I stood there, still holding the box of pastries. Almond croissants, her favorite. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. Just stood there in the middle of her coworkers, holding a box of pastries like an idiot. Almond croissants. I bought them from that place across town she used to love when we first started dating. Back when we still shared breakfasts and silence wasn't something to be afraid of. I picked them up because I thought it would make her smile, because part of me believed I could still do that. But she didn't smile. Not at me, anyway. She barely looked at me. After saying, "You're wrong," she just walked past me, like I was a stranger she'd bumped into at the grocery store. The man she had just kissed glanced in my direction, gave this awkward little half shrug like he didn't know what to say either, and followed her inside. Like this was just a minor interruption to their night. Nobody else spoke to me. Nobody said a word. Just a dozen people in lanyards and shiny shoes pretending I wasn't there, sipping cocktails and turning their backs. I was invisible in a room where I wasn't even supposed to exist. I finally left the box on the edge of the bar and walked out, not because I had somewhere better to be, but because I couldn't bear the silence anymore. Not theirs. Not mine. The Uber ride home was a blur. I stared out the window, watching light smear across glass like watercolors. My hands were shaking, but I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I felt displaced. Like the life I thought I lived had just snapped in half, and I was floating in the gap between what was and what wasn't anymore. She came home an hour later. No knock. No explanation. She just walked in, dropped her bag like she always did, and made a beeline for the fridge. Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't washed her mouth on someone else's. She grabbed a bottle of water, unscrewed the cap, and looked at me like I was being dramatic for sitting there in the dark. "Did you eat?" she asked. I didn't answer. I was staring at her, trying to study her face, to find her in it. The version of her I used to know. The one who left notes in my lunchbox. The one who cried during movies and made weird jokes in the shower. But her expression was glass. No guilt. No shame. Just business as usual detachment. "What was that?" I asked. My voice came out hoarse. She tilted her head. "What was what?" "At the party," I said, still stunned by the fact that I had to say it. "You kissed someone. You kissed someone in front of half your office." She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly said, "No, I let you see it." And just like that, the room spun. Because there are things you prepare for. Cheating, maybe. Lying, maybe. But not this. Not your wife telling you that what you thought was a horrible accident was intentional. Why? I whispered. She drank from the bottle. Slowly. Then, as if reciting a well-rehearsed line, she said, "Because pretending stopped working, and I needed you to notice something." I sat there, stunned, unable to find the edges of her words. Notice what? That she didn't love me? That she had someone else? That our marriage had quietly expired, and she forgot to mention it? What exactly am I supposed to notice, Kira? I asked, finally using her name like a lifeline. She didn't answer. She just turned and walked into the bedroom, shutting the door behind her like it wasn't still echoing in my chest. And the worst part? I sat there, in the kitchen, until 3:17 in the morning. The pastries were still on the table. Untouched. Cold. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat in the kitchen for hours, phone untouched, lights off, the city humming faintly through the cracked window like some mechanical lullaby. I must have replayed the moment 1,000 times in my head. Her lips pressed to his, the tilt of her head, the way her fingers curled around the back of his neck. It wasn't the kiss that haunted me. It was her face right before it. Calm, deliberate, unhurried, like a decision that had already been made weeks ago. Maybe months. By morning, I still hadn't moved. I could hear the shower running, her humming behind the door. She even played a podcast while brushing her teeth. I wanted to laugh. Not because anything was funny, but because this all felt like a prank being played on the one man too slow to notice the camera crew. But there was no crew. Just me. Just her. And the quiet implosion of something I used to call home. When she left for work, she didn't say goodbye. She didn't even glance my way. Just grabbed her coat, keys, and walked out the door like a Tuesday was all it had ever been. And still, I didn't chase her. I couldn't. I felt paralyzed by something I didn't understand yet. But I wanted to understand. So I started with him. The man in the gray blazer. I hadn't gotten a good look at him the night before. Just a blur of styled hair, smug posture, expensive watch. But I remembered the way he held her. The confidence. The entitlement. He wasn't some stranger at the bar. He knew her. He knew me too, judging by the brief, sympathetic look he gave before disappearing into the crowd with her. I started scrolling through LinkedIn. I knew the name of her company, obviously, and after 20 minutes of clicking through employee photos and team bios, I found him. Caden Holtz, Director of Product Experience. Late 30s. Ivy League background. A face that screamed, keynote speaker. His smile in the profile picture was all teeth and precision. There was even a quote in his about section. People don't buy features. They buy feelings. I nearly slammed the laptop shut. I wanted to confront him. I really did. But I also knew I wasn't built like that. I'm not confrontational. I'm not the guy who shows up at someone's office and causes a scene. I'm the guy who runs possible conversations in his head 12 times and still says nothing. But this wasn't nothing anymore. This was my marriage slipping out from under me like a rug, and I was still stupidly hoping to land on my feet. So I sent him an email. Yes, an email. Subject line, "We met last night." I kept it short, polite, civil. I asked if we could talk. I told him I wasn't angry, just confused. I said I wasn't looking for drama. I just wanted to understand what was happening between him and Kira. I read the email 5 times before hitting send. Then I stared at my inbox like it owed me an answer. He responded 20 minutes later. Not with an apology. Not with denial. His reply was just 5 words. "You deserve to know everything." The restaurant he chose wasn't what I expected. Not some trendy downtown rooftop or stiff corporate steakhouse. It was this dim little place tucked behind an old bookstore on a side street I hadn't walked in years. No sign. No valet. Just a green door and the smell of saffron drifting out into the October air like it had a secret. For a moment I thought he'd sent me the wrong address. But then I saw him, already seated at a small table in the corner, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened like this was just another casual Thursday. I almost didn't go in. I stood there on the sidewalk for a full minute, wondering what kind of man agreed to meet his affair partner's husband in the soft glow of candlelight and jazz piano. But curiosity is a powerful drug, and I had questions that had grown too loud to ignore. So I stepped inside. He stood up when he saw me, extended a hand like we were old college friends bumping into each other during Thanksgiving break. I didn't shake it. He didn't take offense. "Emery, right?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit. The way he said my name, calm, almost clinical, made my stomach twist. I appreciate you coming, he said. This is unconventional, I know. I didn't respond. I just stared at him, wondering what he saw when he looked at me. A man betrayed? A man weak enough to meet the guy who kissed his wife and then talk about it over duck confit? Look, he began, folding his hands. Before anything else, you should know, I didn't pursue her. I didn't plan it. I wasn't trying to ruin anything. It just happened. I blinked. It just happened. He nodded. At first, yeah. But later, it stopped feeling like an accident. The server brought us wine. I didn't ask for any. I didn't touch it. Caden did. He took a slow sip, like he was washing guilt down with Merlot. Then he leaned forward and said something I wasn't ready for. Kira told me she tried to leave you twice. I felt something between my ribs tighten, like a string pulled too far. That's not true. She said you wouldn't notice, he continued, almost gently. That you lived in your head so much, she could scream and you'd still be checking the oven clock. She said you used to be soft, but somewhere along the way you just vanished. I could barely breathe. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't bragging. He said it like someone explaining weather, like the storm had already passed, and he was just pointing out how wet the ground was. I wanted to tell him he was lying, that she never said those things, that she loved me, that we were just in a rough patch. But the worst part? Deep down, some tiny sliver of me believed it. I remembered the way she used to talk to me in half sentences, the way I nodded without hearing, the way we moved around each other in the apartment like furniture. Had I really made it that easy for her to leave? She said you stopped seeing her, Caden said, softer now. Not just physically, like really seeing her, listening. I looked down at the table. The white linen had a single wrinkle near my fork. I traced it with my finger because I couldn't look him in the eye anymore. I didn't come here for a therapy session, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I know, he replied, but you deserve context. And she doesn't know how to give it. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made my blood freeze. A small black notebook. Familiar. Worn at the corners. My name written in her handwriting across the top. I didn't read all of it, he said, placing it on the table between us. Just enough to know she's been writing about you. For months. I stared at it, too afraid to reach out. I didn't want to know what was inside. And yet, I needed to. Every page might be a scalpel. But maybe, just maybe, it could explain why my marriage had turned into a ghost town with locked doors and dimmed lights. I took the notebook. My hands trembled. My throat felt dry. Caden stood up, buttoned his coat, and nodded once. For what it's worth, he said, pausing at the edge of the table, I don't think you're a bad guy. But sometimes love doesn't leave. It just falls asleep. And sometimes, it wakes up in someone else's arms. And then he was gone. I sat alone in that restaurant, notebook in hand, the untouched wine staining the white napkin beneath it. I didn't open it. Not yet. I didn't open the notebook until after midnight. It sat on the kitchen counter like it was breathing, like something alive and waiting. I circled it for hours, walking from room to room, making tea I didn't drink, checking my phone even though no one was texting. My hands hovered over the cover twice, but I pulled back like it was radioactive. I kept asking myself why she would give it to him. Why not burn it? Why let him read pieces of her inner world before I even knew it existed? The answer hovered somewhere in the back of my skull, just out of reach. But eventually, silence becomes heavier than fear. So I sat down, turned on the dim stove light, and opened it. The first page wasn't dramatic. It was dated exactly 7 months ago. The handwriting was hers, unmistakable. The way she made lowercase e's too tall, the way her loops tightened when she was angry. The entry started mid-thought. He's in the living room again. Volume low. Same show he's rewatched 3 times now. He doesn't notice when I stand in the doorway. Doesn't hear me breathing. He laughs at the same joke every time. I want to ask if he remembers our wedding vows. Not because I think he's broken them, but because I think he's forgotten them. I wonder if love can vanish without running away. I read it 3 times. My chest felt like it was holding back an ocean. I wanted to be angry, to scream, but I didn't. I just sat there, rereading my own life through a lens I'd never seen. Each sentence chipped away at the illusion I'd built, the one where I was the loyal husband, the stable one, the victim. But here she was, describing me like a stranger on a subway seat. Present, harmless, utterly invisible. The next few pages were quiet, observational. She never mentioned Caden by name. Not yet. But she talked about restlessness. She wrote about dreaming of running. Sometimes with no destination. Sometimes into walls. She described silence like it was a third person in the house. She talked about how I stirred my coffee without drinking it. How I said, "I'm fine," too quickly when she asked how work was. How our bed felt colder even when we were both in it. But then the tone shifted. One entry began like this. "I lied today. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes. But I was thinking about the dream again. The one where I walk out the front door and don't come back. In the dream, I leave a note. In real life, I don't even leave a dent." That sentence hit me like a car crash. I closed the notebook. My hands were sweating. My eyes stung. I sat there in the dark, staring at nothing, while her words echoed like ghosts in the walls. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, I opened the notebook again. This time, the entries were shorter, sharper. One simply read, "I'm not cheating. I'm just looking for somewhere to be heard." And another, "If he looked at me for more than 10 seconds, maybe I'd stop imagining what Caden's eyes would feel like on my skin." That was the first time she wrote his name. I flipped forward. The entries jumped weeks at a time. Her tone grew colder, less poetic, more fragmented. There was one from the night before the party. "Tomorrow I show him. No more hiding. No more hoping he'll read my mind. If he sees it and still doesn't care, then I'm free." That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. The kiss wasn't a betrayal. It was a message. She wasn't trying to sneak around behind my back. She was trying to force me to confront something she didn't have the words to explain anymore. She was staging her own personal apocalypse, hoping I'd finally wake up in the ruins and ask why the world had ended. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't have known, is that the moment I saw that kiss, something ancient inside me cracked. Not because I didn't love her, but because I realized I had stopped fighting for her long before she stopped waiting for me to. And then, just when I thought I'd reached the end, there was one final entry. No date, just 2 lines. "He's going to find this. I hope he reads it all. And I hope he finally sees that I've been gone for a very long time." The notebook felt heavier the next morning. Not physically, but in a way that made my fingers hesitate as I reached for it. I had barely slept. The kind of non-sleep where your body lies still, but your brain keeps running laps through the dark, dragging every memory you've ever had into the center of the room to judge it under a flashlight. I watched the sun crawl across the ceiling in slow motion. When I finally stood up, the apartment felt too quiet, like something sacred had been taken overnight and replaced with air that didn't belong to me. I placed the notebook on her pillow, carefully, deliberately, as if it were a letter to someone already dead. I didn't write anything inside it. I didn't need to. If she'd written those words for me to find, then fine, I'd let her know I had. And if she didn't care anymore, then maybe it would at least break the spell of pretending. She came home late that day. I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't pace or call or check her location. I just sat in the armchair by the window, staring out at the neighboring building like it held answers. I heard her enter. I heard the familiar sound of her keys hitting the bowl on the console table, the muted pop of her heels sliding off, the tired exhale she always gave once she was back inside. All normal, all routine, except it wasn't. Not anymore. She didn't see me at first. She walked straight into the bedroom. And then, silence. For a long time. Long enough that I thought maybe she hadn't noticed it. Or maybe she had and didn't care. But then I heard her voice, barely loud enough to register. "Did you read it all?" I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to talk. I wanted her to feel it. The weight of it. The finality of me not rushing to fix something for once. She walked out slowly, holding the notebook in both hands like it was evidence from a crime scene. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said. Her voice was calm, too calm, like someone delivering bad news that had been rehearsed. "Then why did you?" I asked, not looking at her. "Because being invisible hurts more," she replied without pause. "Because I was tired of being quiet in a house full of silence." I finally turned to face her. Her eyes weren't red. No tears. Just a strange mix of relief and defiance. Like she had prepared herself for this moment months ago, and now that it was finally happening, she was almost grateful. "I didn't know how to tell you I was drowning," she said. "And you didn't notice me sinking." I stood up, walked past her. My mouth was dry. "You didn't give me the chance." "You had 6 years," she shot back. There it was, sharp, clean, final. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just delivered the line with surgical precision. And I didn't defend myself, because some part of me believed her. Or maybe I was just tired of arguing with someone who had already emotionally packed her bags months ago. I was trying, I finally said. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not loudly, but I was trying. Trying doesn't keep people from leaving, she whispered. And then she did something I still don't know how to process. She walked to the kitchen, took the notebook, and placed it on the counter, then lit a match and dropped it into the pages. I lunged forward, but she didn't flinch. She just stood there watching the flames eat her words, like they were nothing more than paper and ink. Not memories, not confessions, not pain, just garbage ready for removal. You don't need to hold on to that, she said. That version of me is gone. We smothered the fire together in silence. Damp towels, burnt edges, the smell of smoke and ash curling through the room like something ancient had just been exorcised. When it was done, neither of us spoke. She went to bed early. I stayed up until dawn. I kept staring at the scorched remains, trying to convince myself that maybe the truth we burned wasn't the only one that ever existed. But the worst part? As I scooped the blackened scraps into the trash, I found something buried at the bottom, a photo, a printout, probably slipped inside the notebook without her realizing. It was of me and her, from 4 years ago, on a pier, wind in our faces, her arms wrapped around me from behind, laughing into my shoulder. She had drawn a line through it. Not a scribble, not a rip, just a single, clean line, from corner to corner, as if to say, this version of us no longer exists. The message came in just before noon. I was sitting on the balcony, watching the laundry across the street flap in the wind like flags from a forgotten country, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. No name, no photo, just a blank contact and a line of text that made my blood stop moving. She didn't tell you everything. Attached was an image, grainy, black and white, scanned like it had been pulled from a printer in a rush. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw her handwriting. The loops, the tall E's, the pressure from the pen heavy enough to warp the lines. It was a page from the notebook. But I had watched that notebook burn. I had stood beside her, smelling the ink curl and the spine snap as the flames spread through everything she'd written. It was gone. Ash. Gone. So how was I looking at it? And worse, why did this page look unfamiliar? I sat up, heart pounding now, fingers tightening around the phone as I zoomed in. The top of the page was dated 2 months earlier than the first entry I had read, which meant it had been intentionally removed before she ever let me see the notebook. Erased, hidden, and yet here it was, staring back at me like a truth that had clawed its way out of the fire. I lied to both of them today. Caden asked if I was serious about leaving. I said yes. Emery asked if I was okay. I said of course. Neither of them sees it. I'm not staying because I love either of them. I'm staying because it's safer this way. My hands went cold. Safer? What the hell did that mean? Was this emotional? Financial? Physical? Was there something else entirely at play that I had been too numb, too passive, too trusting to even consider? Another message came in. You shouldn't trust her version of the story. You think you saw the whole thing. You didn't. No name. No signature. Just silence after that. I called the number. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I sat there, staring out over the railing, replaying every conversation I'd had with Kira over the past year, trying to decode the things she didn't say. The pauses, the sudden changes in subject, the odd moments where she'd stare off, then re-enter the room like she'd just closed a door behind her in her mind. I pulled out my laptop and started looking through old emails, files, calendars, messages between us. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, exactly, just something to tell me that there was still a version of the truth I hadn't completely lost grip on. That's when I found it. An event invite. From nearly 6 months ago. Dinner, Caden plus Kira plus Sarah. A casual calendar placeholder, buried in her shared folder, never removed. Sarah. The name hit me like a sharp whisper in a crowded room. We'd never talked about a Sarah. She never came up in conversations. Never mentioned during work stories. Never referenced in passing. And yet there she was, in a calendar entry that looked like the remnants of a dinner that never got rescheduled. I clicked through the file properties. Last modified, 11:14 p.m. 3 weeks ago. Why would she reopen an old calendar event like that? What was there to edit? The next logical step should have been simple. Ask Kira. But I didn't. Not yet. I didn't trust her with the question. Not until I understood who Sarah was. Not until I understood who Kira had become when I stopped paying attention. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I made a plan. Not to catch her in a lie. Not to hurt her. Not even to salvage what was left. I just wanted the truth. Real, whole, ugly truth. Not the curated story she burned. Not the manipulated half-confession Caden gave me over dinner. I wanted the kind of truth that lived in corners people don't clean. The kind you find by pulling back the wallpaper and seeing what the walls were hiding. That night, I waited until she fell asleep. I knew her rhythm, her patterns, the way she left her phone screen side down, but never remembered to mute notifications. I didn't take it. I didn't snoop through it like some cliché in a bad drama. I just sat beside her in the dark, watching the glow of her breathing, wondering what I would find if I ever truly asked her what she was running from. And then I remembered the notebook. Not the one that burned, the one that might not have. The scan, the photo. Someone else had a copy. But who? And why were they showing it to me now? That question kept me awake. That question felt like the beginning of something much worse than betrayal. It took me 3 hours in a rabbit hole of LinkedIn profiles, archive company events, and social media breadcrumbs to find her. Sarah, the name buried in the calendar. She was a UX designer who had left Kira's company 5 months earlier. No farewell post. No celebratory exit photo. Just a quiet disappearance and a profile update that said freelance, remote only. I found her email. I told her who I was. I didn't accuse. I didn't beg. I just said that her name came up in connection with something personal, and I had questions about Kira, about Caden, about a dinner that may or may not have happened. I expected silence. Maybe a polite refusal. Instead, she replied 15 minutes later with a location. A public park. Neutral ground. Somewhere you meet when what you have to say can't live in a building. I showed up early. Sat on a bench near the fountain, watching kids throw breadcrumbs to ducks while my heart churned like wet cement. And then she walked up. Early 30s, dark jacket, a quiet calm about her that made me sit up straighter without knowing why. "You're Emery," she said gently, like she already knew I wasn't sure how to begin. I nodded. "You're Sarah." We sat. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was loaded, yes, but not tense. Just two people stepping into the aftermath of something they hadn't fully understood until now. She was the one who spoke first. "I don't know what Kira told you," she said, "but I can tell you this. The night of that dinner, she didn't lie to you. Not completely. She was struggling. More than you know." I didn't interrupt. I needed her version. The one Kira never gave me. "She wasn't in love with Caden," Sarah continued. "He made her feel heard. That's all. He gave her attention, sure, but he also gave her something else, an excuse to delay making a choice. Because deep down, she didn't want to leave you. She just didn't know how to stay without losing herself." "And the notebook?" I asked. "Did you make the copy?" She nodded. "Kira asked me to read parts of it. She wanted an outside perspective. I scanned the pages before she deleted them, not because I wanted to betray her, but because I was afraid she'd erase something important. And I was right. I felt something tighten in my chest. Why send it to me now? "Because she didn't know how," Sarah said. "She was going to. But she's terrified of being seen for who she was, not who she wants you to remember." I sat with that for a long moment. Sarah turned to me, eyes kind. "But I'll also tell you something else. She never stopped loving you." I shook my head. "No, she stopped showing it." "Yes," Sarah said. "But sometimes people grow so quietly that they don't realize how far they've drifted until they're looking at the person they love from another shoreline." I didn't respond, because I knew she was right. I drifted too, into my own world, into my safe routines, into autopilot. Sarah stood. "I'm not telling you to forgive her, or to fix it. I'm just saying, maybe it wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was a breakdown. There's a difference." She walked away after that, without asking for anything in return. I didn't go home right away. I walked. For hours. Through neighborhoods we used to explore before we got too busy. Past restaurants we never tried. Parks we said we'd visit. For the first time in months, I thought about who we were instead of what we'd become. The good wasn't a lie. It was just unfinished. That night, I came home to find her sitting on the floor in our bedroom. The burned remains of the notebook spread out around her like puzzle pieces that couldn't be reassembled. She looked up at me. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. I sat down next to her, and we didn't speak for a long time. We just sat there in the ashes. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like a beginning.